Okay.
And then I'm full screening you, and then I am gone for a while, for probably the rest of the time. I
Okay.
can't see coming back. So
It looks like we're all set to go.
go for it. Guys, have a good discussion.
Yeah, people will trickle in. I'm
Yeah, they
sure. I wondered about, it's the first Sunday of daylight savings, people.
Well, the first Sunday of daylight savings was last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And feels earlier this morning to
Yeah,
do
it's
this.
just,
But
I believe it was just a week ago, we were tearing down the church and
I know.
I mean, so much has happened this week in terms of finishing it up. And yesterday I got the first application for next year and I thought, oh, I'm not ready to deal with this.
I'm gonna try to convince my wife to apply for next year's.
She should.
She had a good chat with name is totally slipped my mind.
Jean K. Don.
Kay Gifford, right?
No, she should, because we change every year, so it's a challenge for us to find new people. So,
Yeah,
and she does textile and weaving. And
yeah. She's been weaving for just a few years, but she got a hold of her brother has friends in Southeast Asia. Anyways, somebody sent her this huge thing of silk. It's extremely thin, thread yarn to weave with. And so she took some patterns that were some of these fancy optical illusion type patterns, and she shrank them down to work with this really thin thread and makes a little weaving that's about this big and puts it in a frame. It's really pretty. I've never seen anything else like it. So, well, we have Di, and we have Janet, and we have me, and
Susan Garcia, Stevens Garcia.
That's a good guess. All we see is Susan. So if you want to identify yourself, Susan, that'd be great. This is just sort of a free-form thing. So we can go a whole lot of different directions with it. I'm not supposed to have my face there. I'm supposed to have this document, whatever. Let me see here. I had this shared, and you are screen sharing. It says
yes, you're screen sharing. I see the
I am
cover
screen
of the
sharing.
book.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see the title of the book. I don't see it on.
I do.
Okay, I see my face, but okay. The title of the book is up there. Why isn't it on our screen? I don't know.
Yeah. We saw the cover of the book a little bit ago.
Okay, so that's actually, I was going to start with something else. Before we get into the book and the book of Mark, I was going to ask people whether what your experience in your life was with the season of Lent and with Holy Week. You know, were you raised in an environment where it was a really special sort of time of year and you did certain things and gave up chocolate and all of that? Or was it, in my Baptist upbringing, it was sort of a no big deal kind of thing. I mean, we were kind of made aware of the seasons of the church, but not, that was sort of a Catholic thing, We didn't do those Catholic things in my church. So what about you, Janet?
Well, growing up, it was certainly in my family, we didn't do anything Lent related, but my Sunday school teachers always made us give something up, and I remember I always gave up sugar on my cereal. Those were the days before you bought sugared cereals. So that was always mine. That was my go-to, and everybody thought, oh, that's so good. But living in Mexico, it's a big deal. I mean, the Catholic Church, the whole period of from Ash Wednesday to Holy Week is recognized, honored, it's called Quaresma, and you don't have certain events during Lent. And so the whole time I lived in Mexico, I was very aware of it.
How about you, Di?
Despite the fact that I grew up in a very conservative Lutheran church, in my particular family, and I don't remember it really being discussed by any of my friends at church, it just amounted to being dropped off at Sunday school on Easter morning. So we didn't do any recognition of Lent, and Palm Sunday. I mean, Palm Sunday was a big deal. Oh, and Maundy, Thursday, I forgot we did that. But just kind of went to church for communion. But we didn't really observe Lent in any particular way.
Yeah, it didn't, observation didn't really kick in until Palm Sunday, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, we're not actually going to talk about Lent per se very much. I didn't look up the history of Lent. Maybe some people know it better than I do, but it's my understanding is that at some point the church decided to add this period of 40 days of penitence or whatever to the lead up to Easter, and it's 40 days. I think it was based on there's 40 days and 40 nights, a few different times in the Bible, but I think it's the temptation of Jesus when he went into the wilderness for 40 days. That is kind of the direct.
I think it's meaningful though, just like you have Advent prior to Christmas. It's a period of time of preparing yourself for what is this, the significant message of the gospel. And, one can honor it or not honor it, but I think the point of, was the point of, giving up something for Lent. It keeps your mind focused on it.
Yeah, certainly. There's certainly an interesting contrast when, like this year, when Ramadan falls close to Lent, that to compare how the Muslims do it, because it's a total fast for a month.
Yes and no. I mean,
Well,
fast and feast,
fast and feast, but depending on
focusing your mind.
yeah, and that's what they say. They don't even drink water if they're hardcore about it. And they seem to really get a lot out of it. Maybe because they like the feasts.
I think it focuses your mind. It keeps you aware, and so I see value in it.
Yeah. So the part that happens before Palm Sunday is not particularly directly biblical, but Mark certainly lays out Holy Week, and that's kind of what this book is about. In Mark, there's something that happens each day of the week, and it's clearly delineated. So if you
I kind of haven't kept it up recently, but I have a notebook at home where when I travel, I collect, postcards or pictures of paintings that deal with that week and all the different images that have been painted of that week. And interesting. It's kind of fun.
yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of
Yeah,
art out there.
there is.
If I understand why my screen's not up there. But if you so yeah, there's not a direct date on Palm Sunday. It just says when they were approaching Jerusalem, blah blah blah. But then after that, chapter 11, verse 12 says, on the following day when they came from Bethany, and then 11:20 says, in the morning as they passed by, and then a lot happens on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, chapter 14, verse 1, it was 2 days before the Passover, so that's Wednesday. So Mark's laying it out really, really clearly on a day by day, and we'll see later it goes hour by hour. So that's kind of fun. Why does our screen not show my screen? I don't get that part. Okay, well, those of us in the room will actually have, they don't have this part of it on paper. So once we get to the outline, so you won't need to see the screen. So we need to take a look at the book of Mark, because it's so fundamental to this celebration of Holy Week. And we don't know really much about the book of Mark, but scholars generally agree that it was the first of the Gospels to be written. It was likely written around the year 70. And we know nothing about the author. We don't know if the author was named Mark or not. I'm not sure how it got the name. So Mark was, we can assume he was literate, which is an unusual thing in first century Palestine. And obviously a follower of the Jesus movement. And the speculation is that he was part of a Galilean Christian community. There's some things in the story in his writing that are sort of pro-Galilee, anti-Jerusalem. There's a bit of geography there. When a geography lesson here. Well, let's go back. Let's speculate. So what else is happening around the year 70? Well, Jerusalem's getting destroyed by the Romans. So the timeline is Jesus leaves this earth around the year 30. Between all we really have from years 30 to 50 are the original letters of Paul. And Paul's not anywhere near Jerusalem. He's scattered out all over the place. But apparently the early followers of Jesus sort of set up their headquarters in Jerusalem, figuring that was sort of the center of the universe and where they needed to be. And there's a certain sense, didn't come from this book, but I read it in another Dominic Crossen book, that part of what Mark is trying to do is critique the early leadership. So, and part of that critique is you shouldn't have set up shop in Jerusalem. You should have gone to Galilee because that's where Jesus was from, and that's where you should have been. And then you wouldn't have just gotten all your stuff destroyed because it was sort of a scold. So when you think about it, if you're in the year 70 and you're writing about Jesus, like original disciples and followers, those are the people that became the leaders of the early movement as it kind of branched out and affected more and more people. So by the year 70, Mark would not have known those people personally. He would have heard a lot of stories about them. And he would have, they would have been kind of the leadership of the church that he had known. He probably was too young to have actually met Jesus in person. Conceivably could have as a child and still be writing at the age of 70. So how did the disciples come off in the book of Mark? They seem like they're really sharp and really catching on and really getting it all. The answer is no. They come off as utterly clueless. So Peter, James, and John, and all of the early folks. I mean, we don't know for certain that Jesus, in the course of his teaching, selected 12 guys and said, you're my counsel. More likely that was a post-Easter thing where the early Jesus movement decided they needed some organization and they elected a council of 12 from Jesus's original followers. And they sort of then got moved into the story as Mark told it. And then, and that, Mark plants a flag about so many things that the other gospel writers follow, that Mark could have completely invented things, and they would have, they would have been repeated in the later gospels and been accepted as fact by later Christians. So what other reasons can you think of why somebody who was a follower of Jesus, probably living in Galilee in the year 70, would have felt a need to write a book, a scroll about what happened when Jesus was here and how he died?
Just to state the obvious, if you felt you had that information and the generation that had that generation was, dying off, you'd want the story to prevail.
Right.
And that would be the obvious answer.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been about the time that anybody that knew Jesus personally was gone or about gone.
I think there's a sense when you are the owner of certain information and you understand that you might be the only or one of few that have that, there's a desire to pass it along in a permanent way. I think it motivates a lot of writing.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. We're assuming that Peter, Paul, and John did know Jesus, and he was with them,
Right.
and they're still alive. But it sounds like from what you said, the clueless part is, it sounds like Mark was literate. So somebody had to write it down. Was that what you're hearing from the book?
Well, yes. We don't exactly know what the literacy rate was, but there would have been, since the Jesus movement pretty much started among peasants, fishermen, farmers, etc. There wouldn't be many people who were capable of writing a book about Jesus at that point. And we're thinking that probably Peter, James, and John and all of them would have passed on or had been very old if they were still alive at that point.
Okay.
And their original choice to settle down in Jerusalem and run the church from there had proved to be a problematic one because the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 pretty much wiped out the early church headquarters, such as it was. So
Okay.
it really moved to the center points of Christianity out of the area, places like Antioch and Corinth and places like that became the churches that Paul had established became the center points. There's another piece of why Mark might have done this that different writers have speculated about, and it's kind of what goes into this book, which is for liturgical purposes. So, and the idea of that is that when the early Christian, we'll call them Christians. I know a lot of scholars who don't like to use the word Christian before another 100 years or so have passed from here because it was just not organized into a Christian faith the way we would think of it. What it was some people from within who were Jews, come from a Jewish tradition, also followed Jesus as part of their practice of Judaism. And so what Crossen speculates is that what a meeting of these people would consist of is doing the things that they normally do when they gather in a synagogue as Jews, which is read something from the Torah and discuss it and do some singing and other things. And then they would add on a story or, some event or story or teaching of Jesus's and discuss that as part of their meeting ritual. So probably for the first generation or so, that would have all been an orally handed down thing. Everybody's, and it could be that by the time Mark wrote that, somebody taken some notes and decided maybe on this Sunday we'll tell this story, and on this Sunday we'll tell this story, or this Sabbath. I guess they would still be meeting on the Sabbath. But you can, what you looking for? Okay. Somebody discovered that if you do it right, you can lay the book of Mark down on the Jewish liturgical calendar, starting at the beginning of the Jewish year, which is fall, and going through Passover / Easter. And you would have one reading a week through the early part of the book where it's, Jesus's teachings and healings and all of that. And then when you get to Holy Week, leading up to Passover, you would have readings for each day of that week, and then for Easter Sunday, and then that's where it ends. So it kind of forms a Jewish / Christian liturgical calendar for that much of the year. I guess what we call ordinary time, which happens, after Easter and before fall. I guess there's nothing for that part of the year. But anyway, it's a interesting kind of liturgical calendar for Christians that doesn't really deviate from the liturgical calendar for Jews.
Okay.
I mean, the one thing that we can probably count on as being very factual about the accounts of Jesus' crucifixion is that it happened during Passover. Right? That's I think that's pretty much accepted throughout scholarship as to being that totally made sense. That Jesus did most of his teaching in Galilee. It was a common thing for all followers of Judaism from Galilee and Judea to gather in Jerusalem during the holy days of Passover. And that's okay. Okay, come on in. Sit in the front row so we can talk to you. We were just talking about the, you guys can have. It's supposed to be up on the screen, but I don't know why it's not. There's, when, so we're talking about the Gospel of Mark established this kind of whole very specific Holy Week schedule where Jesus did this on Sunday, which we know is Palm Sunday now, and this on Monday, and this on Tuesday, and this on Wednesday, and this on Thursday. Thursday they had the Last Supper, and then Jesus was arrested. On Friday he was killed. Then there's the Sabbath, where nothing happens, and then after the Sabbath, the women buy spices, and then on Sunday morning they go to the tomb to apply the spices. That's a Christian liturgical week that one could celebrate without, and still completely within the context of celebrating Passover as a Jew. There's a time when pretty much all the followers of Jesus were also Jewish, and didn't really rejecting Judaism at that point. So,
Well, that just seems far-fetched to me, though, that the land is so much different with this, because the followers were not sophisticated scholars, and to make it so kind of obscure that way, I don't know, I find that kind of a lens that could be very,
well,
it's somewhat chronicling the history of what happened, and this is important to the story of Jesus. Because if your purpose was to create a liturgical calendar, it doesn't immediately look like that. Really good at the time that it might. Reading it and hearing it and learning from it.
yes, but if you were a practicing Jew and your life revolves around the Jewish calendar, it's really centered on Passover, and you're starting after a few decades of gathering and including the teachings of Jesus in your weekly gatherings, you are probably starting to develop some liturgical practices that are part of being a follower of Jesus. So it makes a certain amount of sense to me that you're not the primary reason for writing, if you want, but the primary reason is to capture a lot of Jesus and also try to describe his crucifixion in a way that gives meaning to his death, which we talk about. That's kind of task number one for the early Christians. It shows up all over the New Testament. When the apostles went out and preached and spread the word about Jesus, what was it that they said? And it always comes out something like teaching that the Messiah had to suffer. That was the number one bit of apologetics, salesmanship. When you're going out to sell Jesus into the Jewish world was to say Jesus is the Messiah. What everybody expected out of the Messiah was a suffering Messiah. He's killed, but he's still the Messiah. And that's kind of the message in it, is trying to make Jesus' death something like not just a sad moment of martyrdom, but a meaningful. So that's kind of mission of the death meaning. Too, is to write down some of the stories. If you do that, and you want your book to be read by these together, it makes a amount of sense to put them into that calendar. It's very specific about doing that. There's definitely, if you were using Mark's book in your gatherings, really good. It clearly says repentance. Okay. And probably, I would be going to more kind of thing, but it gives you, that's what I say, it's the two, it's fitted into the calendar. Happening right then. It's the Romans sacking Jerusalem, destroying the temple. Important thinking about at that point in time if you were living. Also criticizing the Roman Empire. There's things in the book of Mark that are very anti-empire, but they're very coded. So you can't find anything in the book that says the Roman Empire is this evil, awful thing, partly because that was a given, and partly because if you said that out loud, you probably got in trouble. So there's some coding in Mark. Like early on, Jesus drives a bunch of demons out of the guy. And they go up and put themselves in the river and die. And the name of the man or the name of the demon is Legion. Legion was what it was. So it was a of that. And also a critique of, say, the early disciples who regularly don't get it. And when Jesus is trying to explain what's going on, they're always coming back with, "Oh, so can I sit at your right hand when you come in your glory?" And stuff like that. And Jesus, no, oh, that's not how this works. And it's over and over. And also, Jewish leaders are, that's the whole. possibly some the churches in the Malta. So all of those things are going on in the book. Interesting that going back to the other later gospel writers, particularly Matthew and Luke, use Mark heavily. Almost everything in Mark appears in some form or another. They ignore all the dates and times. All of the stuff in the Mark's last 7 days, 5 days, shows up with different things. They didn't see that. It's in Mark. And there's also a geographical difference between the two. Right now, but if you go back and read dirty little secret about our Easter celebrations, by the way. Every year on Easter, we read one of the 4 versions of Easter. So if you only come to church on Easter and you hear the story of Easter and you go, oh, well, Peter went to last year. The details change. In Mark, so Mark, the women go to the tomb. There's a man there who says, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth who is crucified. He has been raised. He's not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb for terror and amazement and seized them. Spices, they found it empty, and someone said, "Go to Galilee." And Luke's said, but the men said, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and rise again. And then there's other stories about the walk from Emmaus on the cross. And then as Jesus leaves them and ascends into heaven, he says, let them out as far as Bethany, just outside Jerusalem. Lifting up his hands, he blessed them. That's God. So, but then before that, he says, thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and rise from the dead. And that repentance is to believe for him in his name in all nations, beginning with the Jews. So, it makes significant. So, that's kind of one of those, really, both of those can't be true. Galilee or they all stayed in Jerusalem. But talking about. There's supposed to be an event after church. The third week of this 5 week that actually happens. It is going to happen. Okay, so we're going to continue this discussion next week and look at some of the things that happened. And then the 30th class, and then last 2 weeks before fall. Some other direction. So, if you really want to dig into this, I would strongly encourage people to read, if not the whole book of Borg, in light of this. Get these stories, they're all familiar stories. We give them this time of year. But they're usually, it's just this paragraph, and Mark arranges and frames things. We all know the story of destruction. Turning on the tables. Just before that, there's this weird thing where Jesus curses a fig tree and it's not producing fruit. And then after that, the next thing that happened, next morning, they see this withered fig tree. It's like this framing that happens around this story about the people using this metaphor of a withered tree. So you kind of miss that if you just read it, the way the.
Okay, read the mark.
You're supposed to go out and eat the fig tree. Oh, really? And then it'll have fruit. I didn't believe that. And then it said, my girls, let's try it. So we did, and it did. But it comes from the fact that fig trees, whatever. So if you have a fig tree, it's eating it, right? So whenever I read that, I think that they should just give me a room with a fig tree.
Okay, your starts in 5 minutes. See you all next week.
Okay, thank you.
She's on.
Thank you.
Okay.